Thank you everyone for coming in. To start things off, thanks for coming to the interview process breakdown masterclass. This is definitely one of our many classes that we offer on different aspects of the job seeking process. My name is Chelsea. I have been with Jump Recruits for a few months now, started last year. I'm a senior talent advisor, and I have some prowess in the job seeking process, and how to get uh, a new job into a new, transition into a new career, or even just up level in your current career. And I'm partnered here with Mario.
Hey y'all. Um, I am the client partnerships lead here at Jump Recruits, which basically translates to business development. But I used to wear Chelsea's shoes before she came into our organization. So my background has been, I would say, 90% in recruitment. I've seen everything from hires on a same week to hires that have taken a couple of months. So, there's a lot that we can talk about the interview process. And as said, Chelsea mentioned, this is a part of an ongoing series. You can go back to our site to review some of the other sessions that we've done around how to prepare for an interview, how to deal with career changes, and how to present yourself in the best way. So if you're looking for more collateral or content around resume building or interview tips or planning out a career change, then I would definitely encourage for you to visit our knowledge base at jumprecruits.com, and you should be able to find a lot of content to help you on that.
Yes, definitely. Discord, LinkedIn, we are on all avenues, so definitely check us out.
So
Um,
to get things started, last week we covered how to build a good resume and how to build a good cover letter and when to use each. So on that, Chelsea, let's just give everyone a quick recap of how things went.
Yeah, so last week we covered kind of the fundamentals to getting started in the job seeking process. One of those big processes being kind of getting your resume and cover letter set up. We do have a nice checklist to kind of follow if you need to see kind of like a step by step process on how to get that resume updated, as I like to consider it somewhat of a living document that's always, being updated. uh, some of that looks like, just trying to find the right places to highlight your skills and use those buzzwords that recruiters often look for.
Awesome. So to get things started, last session we covered how to build a great resume. Today we're going to go through what really happens during an interview process, and we're basically going to split it in before, during, and after tips to help you be successful during an interview. So the foundation of a great interview, what you should be doing before you get to an actual interview, and what we've seen be really successful, or for candidates that are mostly successful or memorable to our employers, is those that do research on the company that they're going to be speaking to. So that means, going through their values page and seeing what really resonates with you, going through the background of the person that you'll be interviewing with, and maybe call out a few things that you feel are relevant to this particular job. And just overall understanding what you're walking into so that it doesn't come off as just another application in the pile. Um, Candidates that can make a use case, or a case rather, for why this company is a fit beyond what they're looking for are the ones that tend to be either the most successful or the applications that have more of a chance to be revisited later on by hiring managers.
Yes, definitely. I find that as much as you want as a candidate for the company to be personalized with you, the company is looking for very much the same sit thing. So the more kind of effort you could put into that front end to getting to know that company will definitely be of a great value to you as you enter the different phases of the interview process.
For sure.
Um, Yeah, I find that one of the most important interview processes that often get overlooked is that pre-screen. It's somewhat of a deal breaker interview. If you can't have a successful pre-screen with the recruiter, or as some would call the gatekeeper. It's very difficult to make it to that next phase with a hiring manager, or to show off your technical skills with an assessment. So the pre-screen is definitely an essential part of the interview process, that once you understand how to kind of land that interview, you'll be very much more successful in the market.
And for the sake of transparency, or rather clarity, Chelsea, could you tell our audience what you mean when you say pre-screen?
Yes. So pre-screen is essentially that first interaction that you're going to have with the company. Typically, it could be with an internal recruiter for the company, or it could be with a third-party recruiter that is working on behalf of the company. So those folks are essentially just trying to flesh out your background, get an understanding of the skills that you've acquired, what you're looking for in your next role, and if those two align, to move you forward in the next process.
For sure. And the one thing that you always want to keep in mind as you go through those interviews is that that's going to be the person that's going to advocate for you first and foremost. So you always want to set up a good rapport or a good connection with them and make sure that you left a very good impression on that person, because that's the person that's going to be speaking to the hiring managers. That's the person that's going to put your resume on their slate, and that's the person that's going to set the expectations for that particular resume. So you always want to make sure that you're coming into those interviews prepared, that you make it a, I don't want to say fun experience, but a memorable experience. Like, don't be afraid to crack a few jokes here or there if you feel that person is within that same wavelength. Make sure that you're making the conversation right, related to the job search, but you also want to flex your muscles a little bit and show them where exactly you can really shine. And just overall making sure that you're not just another name that's going into an email that's going somewhere. You want for this person to come out of this conversation thinking, this is someone that I want in this organization. And even if that means this is not the role for this person, um, to keep that door open so that it can be revisited is something that you definitely want to keep in mind. And that's, I would think, the real outcome of a pre-screen is to be in the short list for that recruiter.
Exactly. It's almost like a networking event somewhat. You're establishing a relationship with someone, so that down the line they think of you first when something fresh and new comes down the pipeline.
And once again, it doesn't have to be something like spectacularly detailed for it to be successful. What you really want out of that is to ask poignant questions that just make you stand out from the group. Whether that is, what exactly does it mean to be successful in this role? What exactly is this company looking for beyond the skill set? Or how do you feel I could do better on the next interview? Just any type of question that shows a deeper level of understanding or excitement about the role itself or the company itself will always be a big plus.
Definitely. So that's a bit on the pre-screen. Um, once you ooh, I apologize. Once you make it through that part of the interview process, now you're kind of getting into the meat and potatoes of the interview process, which is typically the next step with the hiring manager. Um, Steps in the interview process definitely vary company to company. Some folks might have a short and sweet interview process of one or two interactions. Some might have a little bit more of a lengthier interview process, depending on what their needs are, to uncover what they need to know to make a decision on hiring. So um, I find that the most standard interview process usually looks like a conversation with the recruiter, conversation with the hiring manager, some form of a assessment to assess skills, and then maybe a final interview with um, like executive leadership or managerial leadership, just to kind of round out the conversation before they make an offer.
Yeah, I would say in average, it's something like 3.5 interviews. And I
Yeah,
say and a half because some companies will not count that first conversation as a full interview because they tend to be a lot shorter. But it's usually something like you're speaking to a person in HR, you're going through an assessment, and then you're talking through that assessment with a hiring manager. Um, and then you move into what they usually call a culture interview. So let's break that into bite-sized pieces so that people can have an expectation of what to expect out of these interviews. So we've covered the pre-screen.
Hmm.
There's usually a follow-up to that that's a more in-depth conversation with the HR department. And during those conversations, Chelsea, what would you say are the typical things that people kind of steer away from that they maybe shouldn't, or what exactly should you be doing in that second interview?
In that second interview, you're going to be speaking more towards the person that you might be working under or even working alongside in the team. So that's a great place to get a better understanding of the inner workings of the role and what it entails. Typically, the recruiter that's doing that pre screen doesn't know those more internal details. So, this is a great time to understand exactly what the role is, exactly what skills they are looking to for you to have, and for you to find out what skills that you can grow and develop to while working there to further your career. So um, it's nice when you come into an opportunity where you're 80% skilled in what they're looking for, and then you can get 20% new skills in that role. So um, those hiring calls or those hiring manager interview calls are definitely essential to find that greater understanding.
Got it. And before we dive a little deeper into that, I know that we kind of sidestep around the elephant in the room, which is when exactly is a good time to talk about numbers. So, what are your thoughts on that, Chelsea?
So when it comes to salary expectations, I find it's easier to get it out of the way early rather than later. Um, and a lot of people make the common mistake of showing their hand before they have to. So I find that when the salary conversation does come up, it's definitely well within your right to ask, "Hey, what's the salary band for this role? What's the range for this role?" So that you have an understanding of what they're able to provide, and then you can place yourself within that range if that's something that works for you, or if you're outside of that range, now you know very early on.
Yeah. And the other thing there is you always want to come into those interviews with a range in mind of what you prefer. I think pegging yourself down to a specific number can work against you, but if you have a range that's around 15 to 20K in variation, that's about what I've seen be standard. So something like 80 to 90 or 100 to 115. That's usually around the places that people will negotiate towards. As Chelsea said, you don't want to play your hand first and foremost, so you always start those conversations by asking, what's the range for this type of role, and getting a little bit more information on that before you come out and say that. If you push a recruiter enough, they'll usually, even if reluctantly, show that information or tell you a little more about that information. Unless there's some like confidentiality tied to it, which can be a case with some employers. But for the most part, they will either tell you that you're within range or just give you the range outright. Um, I would say that, echoing what Chelsea said, you really don't want to be playing the guessing game for too long, and you want to have answers that satisfy what you're looking for out in the market because you don't want to waste their time, they don't want to waste your time. And if this is what's needed for it to work, then all parties should be in sync on that within the second interview at the absolute latest.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. And in this day, there's a lot more states that are advocating for pay transparency on the application. So, it definitely is worth your while to read that entire job description from top to bottom to see if they have that pay listed. Um, because then before you even apply if this is something that would work for you and your career.
And even if they don't have something that's particularly helpful, because another thing that we've been seeing is that companies use very big ranges or something that's not really informative. Um, they need to have that information on hand before they make a post so they know exactly what it is that they're looking for. And sometimes when companies do these big ranges is because they're looking for people to fill a specific function, and that specific function carries a broad spectrum of levels of skills. So you might be looking at a company that's looking for software engineers that go anywhere from junior to senior and any and all in between. So there's a
Mhm.
high level of variation depending on your level of skill and experience. So that's something that you always want to clarify, because even if the job description isn't that helpful in some cases, you can always go a bit deeper and find more information on exactly what it is that you need to know before pursuing an application to its fullest extent.
Yes, and that can be a part of that research process that you do before you even apply. Utilizing, you know, sites like Glassdoor, or I believe like Indeed offers some pay transparency on roles. You can kind of get an idea of what they offer for said experience from other people who have worked at that company.
Yeah, and another great place to leverage or someone to leverage is the communities of professionals that exist. So LinkedIn groups, our own Discord community, even Reddit forums can be a great resource in just finding out exactly how much it is that you should be getting out of a certain role. Do be advised that a lot of roles will sound the same but are not the same. So a software developer in X company and a software developer at Y can be doing vastly different things and carrying vastly different levels of compensation. So you always want to make sure that you are aware of what that difference is when you're pricing yourself in that market. And the other thing to take into account is the differences in cost of living. So it's not the same level of income for a developer sitting in New York, for example, than it is for a developer sitting in, let's say, Oklahoma, just because of the difference in cost of living. And that's something that companies usually have to take into account when they're defining their salary bands. So, long story short, whenever you're doing this research, you want to always make sure that the information that you're getting is the most applicable to your particular scenario, and making sure that the information that you're going to leverage during this interview is pertinent to what this employer is looking as well.
Exactly. And while compensation is definitely a big part of the decision making process for a lot of people, there's other great things that companies can offer that can, kind of sweeten the pot for you wanting to join that organization. So definitely ask the recruiter and or the hiring manager, what they offer in terms of benefits, perks, stipends. You never know what they have available, that may not have been listed on their job description.
For sure, for sure. Always get as much information as you can out of those first few contacts, just to make sure that you have as clear as possible as an outlook of what life is going to be like in that role. Because when you get deeper into the interview process, you'll likely be going deeper into the weeds of what needs to be done, but the environment around that is something that you should have on hand as you're going through the process firsthand. Um,
Yeah.
and before we transition into talking about the rest of the interview phases, there's something that I wanted to pick up on that we've seen be successful with other candidates, and that's the thank you email. Fairly simple, but very very effective. And Chelsea, could you tell our audience a little more about how the thank you email really drives things in?
Yeah, so the thank you email essentially is something that you want to send. I recommend within, a full 24 hours of speaking to whoever you spoke with. Usually you can find their email on your calendar invite that they sent out, or if you've had communication with them directly through email, you have access to their email, or find them on LinkedIn to try to see if they have some contact information there. But this is just a great way to kind of advocate for yourself outside of a face to face or phone call conversation. I like to, when I send thank you emails, highlight something in the conversation that we had that really spoke to me. Thank you for their time, and kind of just drive home one more good time the value that I could bring to the company and why I'm excited to move forward in the process. And I have found in my personal experience, the times that I've written a thank you note, I've gotten further than the times that I've not written a thank you note. So it can really be the definitive marker between getting ahead and getting stuck at the pre-screen.
And for those folks that are applying to a lot of roles in a single time, I would advise for you to take a block of time in the beginning of your day where you can see all of the interviews that you already have on slate, and start scheduling emails to go out after the interview has taken place within a certain time interval. And thankfully, that's something that you can usually automate in pretty much all email providers. So it's something that you definitely want to leverage to the full extent of its capability whenever you're writing those out. And like Chelsea said, make it personal. Add a few pieces here or there about the company or the interview itself that really resonated with you. And you always want to have a buffer of about an hour ish in between emails, because if one interview doesn't take place and you're not thinking sending a thank you email to an interview that you didn't have. Um, so yeah, those are just things that tiny little things that can really enhance how your application looks when it's looked at in a pile of people that can be fairly similar in background, but that they still need to pick one of them. And that decision in the end comes down to things beyond the work environment, or what the work itself demands to do, because there's a lot of developers, there's a lot of accountants, there's a lot of pretty much everything. And you need to think of every interaction as a way to differentiate yourself um, from everyone else that's going through that same process.
Exactly. It's a nice touch that will definitely separate you from the majority, more often than not. Um, let's see. Oh, and also on that topic, don't ever be afraid to ask for that email, because it's definitely sometimes hard to get those emails, but if you do establish that relationship with that recruiter, they will be happy to help.
Yeah, and 9 out of 10 times you'll have that in your email somewhere. But if you don't, before you wrap up that call, um, just say something along the lines, "Hey, I'd love to keep in touch to see how my application is doing. Do you have an email I can reach you at?" And most will oblige. Like unless you're applying to like the Pentagon or whatever, I'm sure most recruiters won't have an issue sharing their their email for you.
Exactly. Um, so we're kind of coming to the tail end of our time here, and we would love to open it up to any questions that anyone might have on what we've covered here, or if you're wanting to get a little bit more clarity on something we haven't covered yet. So the floor is definitely open.
And once again, this is part of a regular series. Next week, we'll be doing job search strategy. But if you want to revisit any of the materials that we've done in the past, then you can access them in jumprecruits.com. We have a lot of white papers as well. If you're more of a visual person, um, or if you just want to take your time with it, there's a lot that you can pull from. And we're proud of having a fairly large list of resources for people to rely on as they're going through their career search. And you can always join us in our Discord community. Chelsea's there, I'm there, and the rest of our team is there, along with some other great folks that can offer some assistance in anything that you need.
Yeah, and we also offer weekly career coaching with our founder, Cedric Chambers. So if that is something that you are kind of looking for in your next, go at the job market, definitely make use of that resource. Uh, and we will also be back next week with another addition to this masterclass series. So stay tuned for that.
we'll have one of our team members dropping some links in our chat box on Discord and LinkedIn so that you can keep track of those collaterals and access them in your free time if that's something that you're looking for.
And whether we are actively live or you're just watching the master classes after they've already aired, feel free to still ask questions. We can definitely follow back and give you answers to those questions as well.
For sure. For sure. Right. We'll take an extra couple of minutes to see if anything trickles in. Um, but if nothing does, then thank you all for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure. And once again, if something does come up, or if you have any questions, or if you're watching a recording and there's something pending on your mind, feel free to tap our line. We'll be sure to answer as soon as possible.
I love answering questions.
It's half of the job in talent acquisition.
Oh, yeah. I call myself the question queen.
Quite the nickname.
I know. I ask a lot and I answer a lot.
I love it. I love it. So yeah, we'll just give it a couple more minutes to see if anything trickles in. But in case nothing does, thank you all for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll be looking forward to having you on our next sessions.